Yeah, come on. Hey, no more sitting on the sideline. We gotta wake them up, and I think it's about time. Till they saying it's the truth I see. With number one attorney Zulu Ali. Hey, keep it real, and it's just like that. Everybody goes after the champ. Straight up, going hard, and I don't hold back. That's why everybody goes after the champ. Hey, so let them talk and let them hate. We gonna rise, gonna elevate. So let them talk and let them hate. We gonna rise, gonna
People
elevate.
understand why you have, people and forces that are going, against you. I think the narrative, I think that we are um, trained or, in our society to believe that when people come after you, they're coming after you because you're less than. In other words, whenever you have things or forces that are coming up against you, that they're doing that for the purpose of because you're inferior. That's what we believe. But the reason why I believe that to be, and I know that to be completely untrue, is that we really don't go after people that we don't feel is a threat to us. So, in other words, when we say, and it's kind of like a metaphor related to boxing. If you're a boxer and you want to be the champion, the only way you can be the champion is to beat the champion. You can't be the champion by beating the challenger, right? If you want the belt, you have to go after the person with the belt. You're not concerned about an amateur who does not have anything um, to prove, nor your beating them makes you successful. So if you go on television or you go and you're doing a publicity campaign, do you ever hear someone who is seeking to be the champion condemn someone who is not even in the championship arena? You know what I mean? You're going after the people who you think you have something that you want or that you're fearful of. And I think that uh, the fact that these individuals are the reason that people engage in this type of behavior is exclusively because of their inferiority and their fear. And I think that sometimes we give them way more credit than they deserve. Inferiority is rampant, in our society. People who are given authority, because oftentimes people are given an authority because they're seeking something to compensate for their lack of, you know, because of their inferiority. Another issue that I think that we have as far as Black people is that the idea of recognizing our greatness. I mean, oftentimes when we speak of our history, we speak of our history from a narrative that is uh, more of a victim narrative or exclusively a victim narrative. Now, clearly, the history of African Americans in America and other countries historically is from the slavery perspective and from the colonization perspective. We're clearly, I don't believe that I think that what had happened to African Americans is the greatest crime against humanity in the history of the world. That's what I believe. I think what goes along with it is some of the other indigenous people in their own land, which we've seen that happen in North America and some of the other Americas. So, it's not exclusively, but those are horrific crimes against humanity. And, I'm very much of the opinion that when people go after people or when there's things that are thrown in your way, that when you understand, um, why it happens, then you begin to maybe are able to deal with it. It's just like, it is my mission, uh, and a very, very committed mission to change the narrative of Black people about themselves. Um, I always give this metaphor, and I think you've heard the metaphor, and you have too, where I say that, when I was played football as a young man, my coach used to tell me when you're playing games like football, you have a schedule, and like half of the games are played at home, and the other half of the games are played away. And like for example, let's just say you had a 10-game schedule, 5 of them were on the road, and 5 of them were out of town, right? And he used to always say that when you're playing at home, I mean, you can keep it close because it's your stadium, it's your field, your spectators, your cheerleaders, and your officials, right? And oftentimes, when it gets in when the calls are in the hands of the officials, it usually goes to the home team, right? But he says when you play out of town or you play away games, you have to make sure that you blow them out because if you don't, if you leave it in the hand of the officials, the calls aren't going to go your way. Plus, it's not your locker room, it's not your stadium, it's not your fans, it's not so and plus the whole idea that you have to travel. You don't have the luxury of being at home and playing. Being able to go straight to the stadium. And if there's a close call, usually the officials are going to give the calls to the home team. And I said that being black is like planning an entire schedule of away games, because you have to, it's not your stadium, it's not your field, it's not your locker room, it's not your fans, it's not your cheerleaders, and it's not your officials. And if there's a close call, they're not going to go your way. So you have to be prepared for the blowout. And that's what it's like being, black in America. You have to play the game. And I think that another issue that I think that we have as far as black people is that the idea of recognizing our greatness. I mean, oftentimes when we speak of our history, we speak of our history from a narrative that is uh, more of a victim narrative or exclusively a victim narrative. Now, clearly, the history of African Americans in America and other countries historically is from the slavery perspective and from the colonization perspective. We're clearly, I don't believe that I think that what had happened to African Americans is the greatest crime against humanity in the history of the world. That's what I believe. I think what goes along with it is some of the other indigenous people in their own land, which we've seen that happen in North America and some of the other Americas. So, it's not exclusively, but those are horrific crimes against humanity. And, but at the same time, I think that we have to go back and look at what came out of that. And when I say that, is that, for example, for African Americans, what came was first of all, the Middle Passage. I mean, the mental and physical strength that you had to have to make the Middle Passage is clearly underestimated because there were so many people who lost their lives during that period, whether it was because they just physically couldn't take it, or in many cases, they would just jump off the ship and kill themselves. So now what you've done is once you get to the Americas and whatever other colonies that you were going to, then you have centuries of being treated. I mean, the term slavery is such it's a misnomer because I think that what happened to African Americans was not slavery. It was it was below that. It was like you were treated like farm animals. Slavery was a humane institution. The slavery has existed for since the beginning of time. But I think what happened with African Americans was not slavery. For example, um, the whole employer-employee relationship is a pretty much a Eurocentric concept, right? I mean, in other words, when let's just say you were in Africa, and during that period, I'm talking about centuries ago, and your family, lived close to the water and you were fishermen, and then another family lived inland and they were farmers, then they would barter for things with each other. You did not really work outside of your tribe or family. And the fact that you would leave and go somewhere and work for another tribe or family was not considered to be an employer-employee relationship. Even if there was compensation, that would be slavery in and of itself. And so the lines are blurred within that concept. But what happened with capturing someone other than like prisoners of war and those sort of things, taking them into bondage and treating them like farm animals is not as vast as they would like for you to think. And the fact that we were able to endure that and maintain any degree of mental sanity is unbelievable. The mental strength that it would take for our ancestors to go through that and to be able to survive is nothing less than heroic. And then once you get past that, then we had another form of slavery of like the convict lease system where, people were put on plantations for being arrested for what they call black codes, laws that were exclusively for black people. And then they were put back on plantations, as well as the whole, oftentimes they didn't even leave the plantation because where were they going to go, right? So I think that and then we go all the way to the civil rights movement and go all the way to what I call the new Jim Crow, which is our criminal justice system, and how many black men are in the criminal justice system. Uh, but regardless, I think that we underestimate the greatness of our ancestors, and we really don't take time to we grieve and we always needed time to grieve and manifest our pain and move on. We were never able to do that because that was something that we were supposed to forget. And then what's amazing is every time you bring up that period, we're always told to move on, right? However, this country, that's all we ever do. I mean, we've got you know statutes and memorials and all kinds of stuff all over this country, right? Like, for example, 9/11. What do they say? We will never forget. And what is the purpose of that? But when it comes to our pain and it comes to the things that we've been through, then we're not supposed to remember, right? We're supposed to forget and say we're all Americans. You see what I mean? Um, and so that's the issue there. But I don't want there to be an obsession with this whole, uh, you know, white supremacy ideology. You see what I mean? Because I think that that stunts your growth. You know, I think that it affects all people, even when there's individuals who feel like they are benefiting, their people or our people by engaging or overly engaging in that rhetoric. Whether we're talking about accommodationalists, whether we're talking about the more moderates or collectivists, as they call it, or nationalists and Pan Africanists, it all boils back to how do we deal with this supremacy ideology. I think the first thing that we have to understand, as I said before, is that basically it is not supremacy. They do not do these things against you because they feel like they're superior. I think that the reality of it is there is a lot of inferiority, and there is this whole idea of fear. I mean, because you have to ask, first of all, you begin with the whole concept, the first concept of the fact that they want you to believe that black people are incapable of moving forward. But there's constant systems and mechanisms that existed. They look different. It's the same machine, but the reality of it is it still produces the same thing. Is that the systems in many ways are made to make us look, are made to make things more difficult for us. Even when it comes to trying to do research on individuals, and how children deal with things, or how adolescents deal with things. There's a lot of research about that for the schools, testing, and everything. The people who are making these tests and who are trying to create these criteria, they're all from a Eurocentric perspective. Most of the research has been done on, children who happen to be the majority, so to speak. And when I say that, I'm saying primarily white children or white adolescents. And when you're on this, when you begin to start doing research and creating tests or creating criteria or creating, you know, um, curriculums, they're done in a way in which it's geared towards certain people, but are imposed on individuals with different backgrounds, such as African Americans and other people of color who have a completely different paradigm than and experiences. The reality. It's amazing how people feel like their reality is the reality of everybody, and it's clearly not the reality of everybody. Everybody's situation is completely different, and so under without understanding that, I think that we missed the mark. Just for example, when they had the whole debate about affirmative action, and you saying that affirmative action is exclusively a criteria, or has been a criteria to exclude certain people and give people who are unqualified opportunities in certain things. But the reality of it is that the people who are actually benefiting the most from affirmative action are the majority. That's the first thing. Now, there's a different. I'll hit on that a little bit on a different perspective. But the reason that I say that is the reason why many of these institutions who are competing globally as being the leading institutions who are trying to fighting so hard for affirmative action is because they understand the difference between the training and education. I remember when I was in college, there was a debate between a professor from Temple named Malefi Asante, who was a nationalist, and then there was a Manning Marable, who I believe at the time might have been teaching at Columbia, but I'm not sure, and he was a communist, right? Or I want to say communist, but a socialist. Let me put that straight. And they're arguing debating over certain issues. And I remember, I was in the African Studies department, and after they finished, everybody went to Malefi Asante. They bought his book, they got him to sign it. I went to Manning Marable. I wanted this book and I wanted him to sign it because I wanted to read his book, right? Because I was a non-traditional student, I understood the value of understanding things that are not necessarily within your wheelhouse or within the things that you believed, right? I mean, of course, I would love to, if I'm reading a book from a scholar who has a paradigm that's completely consistent with me, then how is that an education? That's just kind of like reinforcing something that I believe in. So I never kick aside anything that's different than what uh, I'm doing. But that goes back, just going back to the whole the idea of supremacy and the fact that we are considered to be inferior. It also goes back to the whole idea that the biggest benefactor of affirmative action has always been white people, being that they're the ones that are getting, for example, legacy, type of admissions where you're going to get in just simply because your parents went there or somebody within your family went there, and your connections, the fact that you have other individuals that are you're connected to that would allow you to do that, and most importantly, grades and test scores often are dependent upon your social economic status because your ability to pay for those things, right? I mean, so in other words, they're like we saw that with some of the admissions here in California, when you had all of these wealthy people who were paying to get into some of these prominent universities. That was not exclusive or limited to those particular situations. Those were situations that happened probably all the time. And the fact that they have those connections, they know who to talk to, and when it comes to they are grooming these kids to go to these Ivy League schools when they're 6 or 7 years old. They're paying these tests. I mean, test preparation courses. The tutors. I mean, if you don't have the money to go into some of these test preparation courses, or have the money to go to some of these, have to pay for certain tutors after school, then it becomes very difficult for people who don't have access to that. And sometimes we don't we tend to act like those things don't exist, but they're very much important when you're doing that. And many of us come from working parents. They had an early start in the race, and you're put at the starting line when they're halfway down the track. That's kind of where our parents come, because they're not first generation, or sometimes they've been here like in African Americans, but those opportunities were lacking until recently. So many people, like in my generation, their parents did not go to college. They did not have that. So they don't even know how it works. And they're relying on an idea of a system that doesn't really exist, especially when it comes to education. Many people, black and otherwise, think that, okay, I don't have this education, but if I put my child in this school, they're going to get this education, and I don't have to worry about it. I don't have no idea what they're reading. I have no idea what they're teaching. I have no idea of any of these things, right? Um, but I just put them there hoping that they'll be able to get, because I have this belief in something that doesn't really exist. And so that goes back to the whole idea of the inferiority argument. It is not a matter of being inferior. It's a matter of, it's just like, for example, when we talk about sports, for example, we see a different dynamic in sports, because it's a lot more difficult for you to stack the deck against someone. So oftentimes that's why you see it, because it's based exclusively on some a different criteria. But they make it seem like that it's because certain people are physically more dominant and other people are more mentally dominant. But that's just a matter of perspective, in a person's paradigm. So I really go out of my way to address the issue of the idea of people necessarily being inferior based upon, for example, black people aren't as smart, or Hispanic people aren't as smart, or other people aren't really as smart. That's not reality. And if it was, then why are you concerned about affirmative action? Because if they can't make it, then what's the deal? It's only an admission issue, assuming that the admissions is giving African Americans or some other minority a better opportunity, when the reality of it is that white women benefited the most from affirmative action than anybody else. But if they can't make it, they can't make it. You know what I mean? I mean, that's the reality of it. And so I just want people to get off of that inferiority chain, and get off that inferiority mindset. And I think that because of that hate, and that many black people have internalized that, internalized it to a point where, you know, they see themselves through the lens of their oppressor. You know what I mean? And that's unfortunate, because now they see themselves as less. They see other black people as less, and that's why we have so much, hate among each other. And that's where we talk about when we talk about the issue of everybody goes after the champ, nobody goes after the challenger. It crosses that, and oftentimes we see that we can be our biggest enemy, because a lot of times, you know, if you we see it now with social media. Um, they're always the big, when you look at YouTube or whatever, and I'll become a victim of Fire Stick, because now I can't look at anything over 10 minutes anymore. So I'm looking at all these little things, and all of them, the one that gets the most views are the ones that are criticizing other people. I mean, and I find that disheartening when you have one black person um, criticizing another black person for their success, um, and that's troubling. You know, I mean, I don't want to start name dropping out there, but let's just say comedians. You have a comedian that goes out and says, why did this person got a chance because they were a sellout. This person got money because they're a sellout. And I find that problematic because if you're really trying to do something, and the one thing that I've learned, if you're really about something and trying to do something, who has that kind of time? Who has the time? If you're on top of your game and you're the best at what you do, why did you have to stop and criticize somebody else and say, the reason why this person's successful is because he did this or this person did that. And I mean, it's all over the place that we're criticizing each other for our success. I mean, for me, you've heard it about Oprah Winfrey. You've heard it about Tyler Perry. You've heard it about, so many other people within the entertainment industry uh, and other industries that are very wealthy. And there is just, so much out there that criticizes them for their success and calling them evil people, or like Jay-Z and Beyonce, they're Illuminati. And, it's like, what is the benefit of that? I mean, let's just assume, which I do not believe it. I don't know it because I don't know those people. But just assuming that he was, then what does that mean for me? If I'm on my path to trying to be successful, you see what I mean? I mean, I cannot, and assuming that there are people who happen to be African American who are not contributing to their communities the way that people expect them to. And just to be clear, I'm quite sure that nobody knows how much they're contributing. But assuming that, it's not enough, then why would I take the time to criticize them and try to say I'm going to take their black card because they're not doing enough for my folks? And then what would be, if I'm the champ, why does it matter? If I'm on a legitimate path or pursuit for excellence or pursuit to be successful, why would it matter? And nobody goes untouched. And that just shows you that if you are on your path to success, people are going to stand in your way and try to make you feel like you're less than. Um, but and it's inevitable. There's no way that you're going to be on a path to success and somebody's not going to try to stand in your way. And oftentimes it's the people that you least expect that's going to end up standing in your way. But the reality of it is once you understand why people are standing in your way and on your path, then you have to be able to understand the value in that. You know what I mean? I mean, if you're not able to deal with that type of pressure, then it becomes a problem. And I'll give you an example for me. Now, I was raised in a single parent household. My mother raised me without, my father being, and it's not a dig on my father, but it's the reality that she raised me that way. Um, and she worked at a factory called American Can Company at the time. I think it's called American National Can. Now it was a factory, and I'm sure a lot. If you don't know, factory work is generally very hard. And she also worked um, for Sonic. At that time, Sonic, they come out. Well, they still do. They come out to your cars and take your your orders. There wasn't no roller skates, but so she did that. She had those two jobs. Um, and so seeing that and understanding that was, I could have ended up being one of two ways. I could have looked at that situation and made myself a victim, or I could have looked at that situation and understood um, that power in the situation. I chose the latter. I understood the power in that situation, and understood what was possible. You know what I mean? I was not raised to feel sorry for myself. I was raised to basically understand that there are going to be obstacles. And I'm going to have a disclaimer. The disclaimer that I have is, um, I'm not a mental health professional, and I'm not trying to suggest I'm a mental health professional, nor am I taking a dig at anybody who has any mental illnesses, right? But we have to differentiate between mental illness and mental toughness. Um, I do believe that mental illness is an issue that is too often overlooked, and people do not address mental illness the way that they should. But it's just like everything in our society, is that we take an overdose of everything. And if, sometimes just because things do not go your way, then there's not, you cannot get counseling for everything that doesn't go your way. Because you'll never succeed at anything. Everything is not going to happen the way you want it to happen in life. And if you're not prepared for that, then you'll never make it, no matter what you do, because that's just the way that life works. Things are going to happen, and stumbling blocks are going to get in your way. And, I know that there's a lot of, this is not a religious conversation, and I know that we all here are believers, but, um, God has a hand in it too. The devil is going to come after you too. And so you have to be prepared for it, because that's just really the way, life really works. And money does not change that either. I mean, some people feel like they're in this mad dash to get a whole bunch of money, but the money in and of itself is not going to change it, because sometimes money even brings more problems. Mike Tyson once said that people who believe that money will make them happy have never really had money, have never been rich before, never been wealthy, because it's not going to do it. There's other things that are just as important, and are more important. And um, and so when we're trying to raise our children, and that's what we see now. Now that you're seeing, people are wondering now, what's going on with our children? Why are they losing their minds and going out and just killing people? What's going on with these situations in these schools? Now, I do know that, I believe to a certain degree, I can't blame it totally, and I wouldn't blame it totally on social media, but I do know a lot of children have forces in their ear that maybe we didn't have before. But we also are in a time period where we're overprotective of our children, way too overprotective. We can't even discipline children anymore the way that we used to. I'm not suggesting, those people, with corporal people against corporal punishment and stuff like that. I mean, that's okay. But there has to be consequences. And, I think that we have to, teach children at a very young age that if someone teases you, or someone, because everybody, were you teased as a kid at all? Or were you teased as a kid at all? You know what I'm saying? So, that's part of life. Yes, people tease you in a more serious and more difficult way as you become older. But everybody is going to have to learn to deal with those things. And if you teach your children that, hey, if you get teased, I'm going to go up to the school and talk to the principal because you're not supposed to be teased. Then what happens when you're no longer there and you're confronted with life and the problems and difficulties of life. There's nobody that's going to come to save you. And that's the reason why at an early age, I think that we've gotten away from, like, there's this whole thing about bullying. And I'm not co-signing bullying, because bullying is not good and we should address it. But at the same time, you're talking to a child or someone and trying to teach them how to deal with someone who is being bullied, and you tell them that it is, you want to take them to therapy, and then you don't you're figuring out a way to make them a victim because they're dealing with something that a lot of people deal with. Then they don't how do they cope with things when they don't have access to therapy, or they don't have someone there to help them go through what they're dealing with? I mean, the world is not fair, and it can be a very cold place, and we have to begin to start trying to teach people how to deal with things from that perspective. um, and that's kind of one of the things that I try to do with the children and the people that I speak with, and I'm trying to mentor how to deal with obstacles, not how to feel sorry for yourself, but how to deal with those obstacles that you go through. Um, and the more success that you get, the more people are going to come for you, right? I mean, if you're not doing anything, nobody's coming for you because you're not a threat to anyone. But I mean, especially as black folks, no matter what you do, people are gunning for you. Barack Obama, who ultimately, um, you know, had the blueprint, went to nice colleges, went to a good law school, very well educated, appears to be an individual who, you know, done the right things as far as family and his values tend to be in order. Look at people who come after him. And he became the president of the United States. And it's still not, and he's a black man. And people gun for him. His own people, other people, everybody figures out the way. I mean, a man becomes a president of the United States. He couldn't have had too much. Trust me, as a black man becoming president of the United States, if you had a lot of stuff, they would have got it. So obviously, this dude was almost superhuman, Superman, right? And so, I mean, like, throughout history, we've seen that. I mean, if you look at greatness, if you look at the heroes that came out of the Torah, the heroes that came out of the Bible, the heroes that came out of the Quran, um, the one common theme is the obstacles. Whether you're talking about the way that the Prophet Muhammad was treated by his own people, whether you're talking about Jesus, which we know how much he was portrayed, right? Or even all the way back to Moses. All of the prophets in the line of the prophets, the commonality is how did they deal with the people who went after them when their mission was even to help those people. You see what I mean? And there's really no exception to that. And then when you go and you even look at modern times, like now you see how we talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and how, everybody, he's a hero and a treasure. But what people don't know is that Dr. King was a considered to be like a radical during the time. People, when he came to town, white people and black people did not want him in town. I had an assignment when I was in college where they wanted us to speak with our parents about Dr. King and the civil rights movement. And I remember my mother said that he was looked at as a troublemaker. But we don't see them that now. We look at him as like more of accommodationist and he wanted peace. But, we know he was arrested. We see how people have even went after his character. In fact, the government had an organization that went after people's character, the COINTELPRO, and they said that he was a womanizer. That was the same thing with Malcolm X. I mean, we see that, um, how we clearly, there's no question that Malcolm would have been seen as someone who was a radical. But we also seen his early life and what he went through and what he came up as. But even though he did that, and all he really wanted to do was tell the truth and help his people, then we see what happened to him. You know what I mean? So nobody escapes, even in their death, they are being ridiculed. I mean, and that's just how bad and harsh that the devil really is. That he'll chase you. He not only will he chase you, he'll chase your legacy. You know what I mean? And so as we're going through this journey, because I know there's a lot of people, that are suffering and, you know, with problems that they're dealing with, and many people do it in silence. And many people give up on their dreams because of those obstacles and because they feel like it's just like it's one thing after another. Um, and most people will give up, and it's my opinion. I don't know everybody, but I do know a lot of people don't even step into the ring because of their fear of what will happen if they pursue their dream. Because everybody's telling you what you can't do. I remember when I was in school, this is kind of funny, I guess. But I remember when, kids used to make fun of other kids who didn't do certain things. Like oh, you don't smoke weed, you don't drink, and they make fun of you, right? Soon as you smoke weed and you drink and you come to school, say, what do they say? Man, you are drunk, right? You an addict. The same people that made fun of you for not drinking and smoking are now criticizing you when you do it. You know what I mean? Because everybody wants to lead. It's amazing how everybody wants to lead you down that path. It's kind of like the good girl that goes bad, right? When you're the good girl, everybody makes fun of you. But then when you become the bad girl, then they have those nasty names to call you, right? Um, and that's just the devil, man. I mean, that's just how it works, unfortunately. And I think that my objective, and I want to spend as much time as I possibly can and committed to giving people that message that need that message, that when you're stuck, always realize that as long as you are close to your creator, and and have that belief and understand that in the final analysis, you know it, it's written, right? And don't let someone take away what's yours, because the creator put this there for you. And on your journey of something that's going to getting there, there's whispers. He can't take it from you, but he's convinced the only way that you can be stopped from getting what's yours is if he can convince you that it's not, right? And that's kind of the journey that people go on. They're going on this journey, they see it, and there's these whispers. And if it's yours or it's not, it's already written. God made that for you. And people are always trying to figure out way, or well, the devil through people are trying to make you feel like it doesn't belong to you. And they whisper and they want you to quit. I can't do this. This is too much. You know what I mean? Um, and you're gonna have sometimes it's sleepless nights. Sometimes it's crying. Sometimes it's like I can't believe this. But if it's for you, it's for you, and you have to stay on that path, and nobody else can, and they can't take it away from you. And that's the way it operates, and it doesn't change no matter what your situation is, whether you're white, black, red, green, or brown. That is the reality of all of it. Um, and that goes for, the only thing that makes you stop somebody else's journey. So now you can't get yours. You didn't go after what you wanted to get, right? In the way in which God, in a godly way. So now you're going to get off track, and because I see you going for yours, I'm going to try to let the devil, he done got me off track. Now he got me messing with you, making you feel like you can't do something. I remember there's a couple of things that I'll never forget. The one thing that I will never forget is that when I came to California, I was married, and she's my youngest child, married with 4 daughters, with a wife and a mother, and moved across the country to come to California to go to law school, and I didn't even have a job yet, right? And I remember leaving and someone saying, "How are you gonna do that? How are you gonna go to California, become, I'm from Tennessee, and become a lawyer with all this? How are you gonna do that?" And as soon as I became a lawyer and went home, the same person who said that to me came up to me and told me that they always knew I was going to do it. You see what I mean? So, you know, now if I would have came off the track, I didn't do it. You see what I mean? And that's just how we are. I mean, unfortunately, and that's the same thing, the same type of ideology, the same type of idea when it relates to our people being black people, or whether we're talking about people of color, Hispanic people. It's the same, that people are going to be in your, and try to do everything that they can to try to get you off track, and that's what happens with black folks and so-called white supremacy. It can't stop you. Look, one of a very, very good friend of mine, his name is Terry Major, and we call him Imam Talib Major. He once made a statement, and it was on our show actually early on. He passed away, but he was on our show once, and he said that if the the um, ink was not dry on God's word, what black folks have went through would be prophetic. And if you think about that, when you look at the story of where, see, the problem is that we spend so much time thinking about where we didn't get as opposed to where we got. And I always have this statement. I always say, you judge a man by distance traveled, not where he's at, but where did he come from. And if you think about the fact that we were people who, based solely on the color of our skin, was considered to be farm animals and less than, at least treated that way, to becoming the, and I'm just using this as an example, someone who has a similar skin color becoming the president of the United States, is, it shows you that God is in control. We were never intended to come out of the situation alive. That was never the intent. So, he was driving, and many of the things that was happening, we give credit to the wrong people, right? Where we are now, they couldn't do nothing about it. So don't think that we gave you anything. So what they want to do is just say, hey, in this country, we did X, Y, and Z for you, right? Well, the reality of it is we did X, Y, and Z for you. You know what I mean? But beyond that, you cannot stop where this was my destiny. This was my destiny, and there's nothing that you could have done to stop it, and there's nothing that you did that put me here. And I'm not gonna get it twisted. Obviously, you have it twisted. Um, and we have to, you know, deal with it, that way. and understand that, because that's the reality of it. I mean, because I'm a witness to it. Because I mean, I realize that where I am in life is 110% God's grace. I'm never going to come in and tell you that, you know what, I deserve this. You know what I mean? I worked so hard, I deserve it, or whatever. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm here because God put me here. God put me in a position that I'm in because of his grace. It was my destiny. And I'm not going to go back and say, well, you know what, I wouldn't have been here had this hadn't happened, or that hadn't happened, or this is going to, and we have to keep those things into perspective, when we are dealing with our obstacles and dealing with people in the community, especially people who are disenfranchised and oppressed. And oftentimes when we make moves and we're trying to get people to give us something, that's why I'm always hesitant to show you my humanity, because I'm giving you way more credit than you deserve, to show you that I'm worthy of something, you know. And and sometimes when we strategize about doing certain things, I think sometimes we frown when we should smile. You know what I mean? I mean, because I think that we who got, as they say in the streets. You know what I mean? So if I'm looking at you and see where I'm standing, and you're standing there, I remember one time I was in trial. I did a trial one time, and my daughter Whitney had just been admitted or just passed. I think she just got admitted. And I went to this particular judge and I told the judge, I said, "This is my daughter. Um, she just passed the bar exam, right? Or got admitted." And his response was his pedigree, right? He tells me about his pedigree, which was a legal pedigree. Like, my daddy was this, my daddy was a lawyer, his dad, but whatever. And I told him proudly that my grandfather was a janitor who cleaned law offices, right? So who is impressive? A person who came from a grandfather who cleaned law offices, or you whose daddy's daddy was a lawyer? In my opinion, I think that I'm up on you, but that's just, I don't want to sound, I want to try to be humble about it, but that's the way I see it. Where did you come from? And and sometimes when we're dealing, and then how did you get it? And that's another thing that we often have to look at. What do we really want? Would you really want to be able to say, I'm successful because, let's look at the history. Whose history, let's just assume we're thousands of years from now, and I'm selling the most noble history. And my history is that, my ancestors were kidnapped or sold into slavery. They came across the Middle Passage. They spent several centuries in bondage. They went through societal constructive slavery, and then they ultimately uh, succeeded, right? Or would I would say that, okay, so my folks kidnapped people, killed some people to get some land. Um, we oppressed some people, mistreated some people, told people that they couldn't come into a country that I wasn't supposed to be in any damn way. And then I'm here, right? Keep it in perspective. Look at that narrative. You see what I'm saying? And so, you know, but we get it twisted. So what are we are am I telling you that I want your narrative? Because you're writing it, but I know better. And eventually, you know, the truth always comes to light, right? And so I think that sometimes we have to change the way we're seeing things and change the narrative and look at look at where we've come from, and we need to smile a lot more, and um, you know, respect our circumstances. You know what I mean? What you think? Huh?
I agree.
What you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, God has a plan for you.
Mhm.
And no matter how much you deviate from it,
Mhm.
that's the plan He has for you.
Mhm.
And no matter how much credit other people try to take for that
Mhm.
plan that He has for your life, in this case, white supremacy and
Mhm.
whites for where we're at in this country and what has been established for people of color,
Mhm.
it wasn't their plan.
Right.
It's literally been God's plan.
Yeah.
And they've been trying to act like they are God, even when we think about manifest destiny,
Mhm.
where
Right.
they were God ordained to
Right.
kind of,
Mhm.
and that's kind of where I feel we get it wrong and
Mhm.
we get confused. And I feel like we live in a society where we're so focused on instant gratification on in the moment
Mhm.
that we forget about the purpose
Mhm.
and thinking about what is our purpose on this earth as opposed to what am I going to do today to
Mhm.
make sure that I get that instant gratification.
Mhm.
And I think that's where you touch
Mhm. Mhm.
on you seeing your own purpose in your life
Mhm.
beyond the daily things, beyond the things that people talk about
Mhm.
us as people of color.
Mhm.
It's more than that.
Right. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's it. The manifest destiny. I
Yeah.
forgot about that concept. Yeah. So yeah. So what do you think as far as your influence? Because I know now you're trying to become an attorney yourself.
I feel like I do face obstacles as far as like, being in the mindset of, okay, like certain people saying, oh, you're a little bit too old, or
Mm,
maybe you can't do it. Maybe you should really do something else.
mm,
Or, a huge thing right now is like, get your certification, get a good job.
mm,
And that's something that's great for
mm,
people that, want something in the moment, or
mm,
like, oh, yeah, I kind of just want this job for the moment, get
mm,
vocational training, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I
mm,
think there's a bigger picture to
right.
so much more.
Yeah.
And for me, I just don't see any other way
Mm,
than what I'm doing now.
right.
Even though I've had other jobs and
Mm,
done different things,
mm,
I'm like, okay, that works for the moment, but I
right.
always go back to, well, this is what I really want, and I
Mm,
can't really go
mm,
any other way than
right.
how I'm
Right.
going. So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely, I definitely feel that.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole thing. I mean, you just have to keep, there was that series, eye on the prize. Keeping your eye on the prize and realizing that, in the final analysis, you know, it's there's a destiny and then there's these obstacles, and sometimes, unfortunately, we allow, you know, things to throw us off that path. I mean, and I mean, I feel like, a lot of people always talk about balance, and especially nowadays, and work-life balance, you know, um, which is fine. I mean, I think that sometimes it can be, you know, um, what I think is a excuse and a crutch, for, um, because you said just in the moment.
Mhm.
And so when you're looking for something that justifies the fact of you not being able to achieve your goal, because ultimately you'll have to reckon with it. You know what I mean? And I remember watching this motivational video and I can't remember who it was saying that you was on your deathbed and you're looking at the angel of what was yours, but you never did, go after it. You know what I mean? And so that's and I think ultimately people as they get older, they feel like those goals get further and further and further away, and they've given up on the things that they should have, pursued
Mhm.
when they were, it's never too late, first of all, and second of all, and I'm a testament to that. But second of all, um, when you have something that you're trying to pursue and you don't do it, there will be regrets in the latter times, in the later years. They really will, and that's the thing about time. Time never stops. I mean, when I was, I remember when I was getting out of the military and I was 18 and considering, retiring. I'm glad that I took again the path I took. I'm glad I took the path. But at 22, I thought 38 was really really old to retire. I could have retired twice almost by now. You know what I mean? But then I look back and think, no, that's crazy. But that's how we think until every day gets old, gets further and further. You look back and the time is ticking. I mean, you get at a certain point, you're like, man, had I done that then look where, and it just keeps, you keep procrastinating on that idea, you know. But I mean, it still comes back into full circle as it still comes to the same thing when it comes to, you know, uh, people, specifically African Americans, uh, who I so much would like to see, and again, I'm committed to the whole idea of changing that narrative. And I'm not of the opinion that someone can keep you. I mean, there's obviously, again, the obstacles are there. There's no question. I mean, they put, and it doesn't matter what you do, it's going to be way more difficult than other people, and they're gunning for you. And then when I say they're gunning for you, they're gunning for you. You know, and it's, I can look back and I can think of all of the, people who spent so much time trying to destroy me, and they were committed to it because they don't want to do anything, themselves.
Mhm.
And yeah, I can just tell you firsthand. I mean, this maybe sounds like a conservative ideology, but you know, some people don't want to work for anything. You know what I mean? And it goes beyond race. There's some people that they just don't want. And I can tell you this right now. They could say someone said something the other day about immigrants, and now the workforce, which now is now the work balance workforce that don't really want that, in my opinion, and I'm sure I get a lot of criticism for making this statement, but don't want to work. I mean, as a business owner, who needs someone to come in and they need someone to work. I mean, I'll go in. You don't think I'll go somewhere else to find somebody that's going to work? And then you're going to complain because somebody else is taking your job? I mean, you don't want to work, right? You see what I'm saying? And I mean, you get that. I mean, that's a true statement, and people are saying it. Nobody wants to really address that, but there's a lot of reality and a lot of truth to that. And so, when you're in a situation nowadays, I'm just not feeling the whole, get as much as possible for the least amount of effort. And that's not, that's just not, you know, and if it does take you a little bit more to get where you need to be, and, how do you do it? Do you just stop? In other words, when we talk about black folks and what we're dealing with, do we stop? And you have to keep
Yeah.
going.
Come on. Hey, no more sitting on the sideline. We gotta wake 'em up, and I think it's about time. Till they saying it's the truth I see. With number one attorney Zulu Ali. Hey, keep it real, and it's just like that. Everybody goes after the champ. Straight up. Going hard, and I don't hold back. That's why everybody goes after the champ. Hey, so let them talk, and let them hate. We gonna rise, gonna elevate. So let them talk, and let them hate. We gonna rise, gonna elevating mentally. And I got the stamina, ready for whatever problems, I can handle them. Yeah, I got the power to drive, and I ain't scared of them. Everyone goes after the champ, never the challenger. Yeah, dealing with the conflicts, envy, and the racism. This is my life, my beast. Now you ain't getting. I got Zulu Ali fighting, so I'm all good. Support your people on the real, yeah, you all should. I know the devil be hiding, waiting for me to slip, but I'll forever deny him. Whatever happens, I ain't worried. I'm in SoCal, rocking with a legendary attorney. Let's go. Keep it real, and it's just like that. Everybody goes after the champ. Going hard and I don't hold back. That's why everybody goes after the champ. Hey, so let them talk and let them